You are listening to the Lawyer Stories podcast with host Benny Gold. Lawyer Stories was founded in July 2017 on Instagram and is an expanding global network of lawyers and law students sharing their personal journeys to the noble profession of the practice of law. Join us on this podcast as we dig deeper into these stories and hear from lawyers and law students from around the world in all areas of the legal profession. Here at Lawyer Stories, we believe that every lawyer has a story. What's yours?
Welcome to the Lawyer Stories podcast with Benny Gold. Today we welcome Allison Pierre, CEO at Innovative Prosecution Consulting. Allison is a criminal justice reform advocate, empowering prosecutors to make smarter policy decisions with data-driven insight. Located in Washington, D.C. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Good to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us today. You're doing a lot of interesting work. I really haven't seen anything like it, so I'm really excited to talk about it. But first, I'd like to know a little bit about your path to the law, since it is Lawyer Stories. Are you from DC?
I actually was born in DC, but I consider myself a New Yorker.
Okay, that's right. You did prosecution in New York, right? So you lived in New York most of your life?
Actually about 20 years, but my connection to New York, 20 years in New York City, and most of that time in Brooklyn. I was a prosecutor at the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office.
Wow, that's amazing. So before you went to law school and everything, like undergrad, maybe before undergrad, did you have a moment where you knew you wanted to be an attorney? Nothing like that. So that's okay. You didn't have like that huge epiphany that was like, oh, like I'm going to be an attorney. But so what drove you to go to law school? Let's try that.
Well, to your point, I was not the person who knew at age 7, I want to be an attorney.
Sure.
But for me, what drove me to law school was I was in college. I went to undergrad at Columbia University, and in college,
Wow.
I saw an attorney in housing court, which doesn't seem really exciting, but at the time, the attorney was doing a cross-examination, and it seemed so theatrical and dramatic. And I remember thinking, I want to do that.
Yeah.
And I was an economics major, had no intention of being a lawyer, wanted to go to business school. And then after seeing that little weird housing court cross-examination, I thought, yep, I'm doing that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually used to go to housing court a lot in New Haven, Connecticut, so I'm familiar with that as well. So you kind of did have a moment where you were like, hey, I want to do that. Like you saw the housing court little procedure, the process going on there. So you have some incredible experience in law school and leading up to where you are now. Law school, you were very involved with. It looks like moot court.
Yes.
Can you just tell us a little bit about that and like the importance of maybe doing moot court or like trying out for like the law review if you don't automatically get on because of grades? What importance do you place on those things?
Well, Ben, that was me because I didn't have the grades probably to get onto law review.
Okay.
I had good grades, but I didn't even apply to law review because my passion was actually being a trial attorney or an appellate attorney. And I felt that moot court was the beginning step to that path. And I did moot court in law school, and I was on the moot court team. I won best appellate brief.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It was fun. It helped me improve my writing.
Yeah.
And just to law students who may be listening, again, there's more than one path to success as a trial attorney or a litigator. It doesn't have to be writing for a law review. It can be that or not, or something else.
Right. So would you say that experience like maybe gave you some confidence or helped maybe like confirm that you wanted to, be in court being a prosecutor or like a trial attorney?
It did. I think Before I went to law school, I already knew the job I wanted, which was to be
Okay.
a prosecutor. I only went to law school because you had to go to law school to get to being a prosecutor.
Got you. That makes sense. Yep.
So when
Okay.
I was in law school, I did everything related to criminal trial practice, interning for trial court judges or appellate court judges, and then of course doing moot court. And then the major thing I did in my last year of law school was a clinic, the criminal justice clinic at American University's Washington College of Law.
Yep.
And for me, that was all things that I knew I wanted to do even before I applied to law school.
Wow. Okay. So like that's pretty cool that you had sort of like that vision before going to law school, like what you wanted to do, those things. Like how important would you say doing a clinic is and being hands-on in law school?
I think for me, the clinic was extremely important because I learned the basics of trial skills, which I needed when I became an assistant district attorney at the Brooklyn DA's office. And I think for law students, sometimes, it's hard to find your way if you don't necessarily shine in taking exams, for instance, but if you can shine and get like set yourself apart when you're doing criminal trial practice or civil trial practice, that's another path to success. And for me, that was my path.
So like going back to the moot court, I remember doing a moot court argument in law school, and I was like, they were peppering you with questions, and I think it was just actually I think it was like the appellate argument, and you're getting peppered with questions, and it's like your mind's kind of spinning, or me at least. Like, do you have any like what is your advice for like a new attorney who's in front of a judge, and like how to keep your composure? Do you have any advice for us?
The major thing to remember is that you're going to feel fear.
Sure.
If
Yeah.
you're not, yes, you will feel fear if you're about to come before an appellate court panel, which I've done,
Okay.
and, or if you're before a trial judge, or if you're about to start a jury trial. It's healthy, natural.
Yeah.
Every time I started a trial, I would have a little bit of anxiousness, but it was
Sure.
really just me really just taking hold of, I'm getting used to I'm about to dive in this pool, and the pool is, I'm going to start a trial. And once you start, then something comes over you and you feel absolutely at peace. And then
Mm.
for me, it felt like once I got over that initial fear, it became fun.
Right. And you sort of settle in, and you're like kind of really have like the fun aspect kind of comes out, and you're there doing what you want to be doing, right? It's sort of like presenting that way.
It is, and I know that most attorneys do not actually try cases because that fear of the uncertainty of what's going to happen. But for me, that was the adrenaline rush of being extemporaneous and creative and figuring out what my argument's going to be without necessarily knowing if it's going to work, and then
Right.
switching it immediately. And that is something that's a beautiful thing. It's a good thing.
Sure. Well, you're definitely creative with the items that we're going to talk about. And so, Allison, you had like amazing experience leading up to where you are now, being the CEO at Innovative Prosecution Consulting. So we're going to discuss that in a moment, but what I'm really curious right now about is like what in your career catapulted you to get into criminal justice reform?
Actually, it was something that I started to think about when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office in DC. So
Yeah.
that would be the midpoint of my career. I realized that a lot of the defendants that I was dealing with were from communities of color.
Okay.
And especially in DC, a lot of the defendants were African American. I'm African American, so
Mhm.
this is my community that I'm prosecuting.
Yeah.
And for me, this became a very personal pivot where I thought to myself, I don't just want to try cases. I'm not really here anymore to do a certain number of jury trials or bench trials. And for me, the aha moment, so to speak, came when I read a book about criminal justice reform. And
Right.
this book, then, it changed my whole career path.
Wow.
The book is The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness.
Mm.
And then there's a documentary called 13th by Ava DuVernay. Those two things together, it felt like a huge awakening, because it felt like I had to do something to fix what really was decades of over prosecution, over policing of communities of color, specifically Black men. And it was a painful awakening, because I didn't know that prosecutors were part of the problem.
Wow.
That my role was helping. It was a wow moment.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
It was me thinking I thought I was doing work that was fair and just, and I think I was, but I was also probably helping accelerate mass incarceration. So I realized at that point, I can't leave it to others to address this. It has to be someone from my background, because I was a former prosecutor. I felt like I would be a person that could address reform from a different perspective, because it's personal to me, number one. And then two, I really thought, I love this job being a prosecutor. How do we bring data and technology into the profession to bring it really much more into the 21st century?
It's unbelievable. It really is. Have you ever thought about, this is just kind of off the cuff, have you ever thought about being a professor? Or are you a professor?
No, I'm not a professor, but I would love to actually work with law students in clinics to talk about the role of a prosecutor, or even just criminal justice reform in general. So to your question, yes, it's something that I think I'm definitely interested
I mean, I think this is like what you're onto, and like this viewpoint is like super interesting. You know, at UMass Amherst, I was a legal studies major. You know, it was like sociology and the law, and like we read a lot of. I mean, that was like actually a couple decades ago, but like we read a lot of good stuff, and this sort of feels like something that I would have studied back then. So I really like. I think it's really really interesting. So tell us about Innovative Prosecution Consulting. Like what motivated, I mean, you just kind of talked about the motivation, but you could talk again about like what motivated the transition to, you know, to start this, and tell us about it.
Sure. Initially, I thought I will work for a nonprofit that does criminal justice reform. That would have been the traditional role. The challenge there wasn't a lot of nonprofits that were doing prosecutor reform in existence, because it's new. And I really wanted to be finite and look at prosecutors, state prosecutors, not so much federal, because criminal justice really happens on the state level. I created my own LLC.
Okay.
I felt like if I create an LLC, and then step two after creating that is coming up with an idea, data program, and the data program would really showcase what I'm bringing to the prosecutor's office. And it's three things then. Part one is data dashboards. Part two is change management. And change management meaning getting the line prosecutors, the executive level prosecutors, bought into the idea of collecting data, analyzing it, and then showing it to the community. And three of the program is community engagement.
Okay.
And that means explaining criminal justice reform in an easy to understand way, so that constituents can see that an elected is delivering on his or her campaign promise about reform.
Okay, interesting. So, wow. So, I mean, that's really interesting. Like, how did you know so much about data, like, and that sort of thing? Like, I mean, as a lawyer or somebody who has like a legal education, I don't really, you know, I speak with a lot of people about like AI and legal tech and this and that and data. Like, how did you know like what data to sort of go for?
Before I created my program, I researched everything I could. I read books about what would be the most efficient way as to data and reform, and I would read articles about it. I talked to professors who had already started some of this work at the entity that I really focused on was the Vera Institute of Justice. They had already started a lot of this work. So I basically educated myself about what had already been done in the field of data collection and prosecutors.
Okay.
Which didn't take long then because there wasn't much done. As you said, lawyers, this is not what we use.
Right.
As lawyers, we use physical evidence, documentary evidence. We're comfortable with discovery, which is what we turn over for trial, but it's not really a part of our culture to collect trends and patterns of decision-making if you're a prosecutor, like charging, plea offer, bail, and then analyzing it. That is beyond the culture. But the whole point of all of this, Ben, it wasn't just to analyze data. That's not the point.
Yeah.
What I realized is that to get lawyers and prosecutors to evolve their mindset and their behavior and their decision making, you have to show them statistics.
Okay.
Because as you know, as lawyers, we like facts. We like evidence. And what I wanted was, if I were to show that there's some disparities in charging at a state prosecutor's office, and that's happening with some of the prosecutors, then I could start to get the attorneys comfortable with the idea that if you look at trends and patterns, you can see if there's unfairness in some of this decision making.
That's so interesting. So like when you were in Brooklyn, were there any cases that you saw or you kept like, trying to, when you were prosecuting, like get the same sort of, result that made you think like, whoa, like this is too harsh. This isn't right. This demographic is, being unfairly treated. I mean, what was it in Brooklyn? Was there something there, like a certain case?
There wasn't a particular case, but to your point, in Brooklyn, the culture was, if a defendant wanted to plead guilty, they could do that, or they could go to trial. And if they're pleading guilty, then it's going to be a jail sentence or probation, parole. But I started to see that probably not many of my cases were diverted out of the criminal justice system with treatment programs.
Okay.
Drug treatment, community service. And at the Brooklyn DA's office, we're talking back 20 years ago, it was one of the offices that really was at the forefront of diversion back then.
Okay.
But still, I really didn't know how many cases I was diverting, how many cases I asked to be part of some kind of rehabilitation program. And the point of that is your case can get dismissed if you're a defendant and you're in compliance with a prosecutor-led treatment program.
Right. Okay. So you have customized work plans at IPC. So tell us a little bit about those.
What we do that's very unique is we meet with the elected and the executive team, and we ask the team that we're meeting with what particular thing are they interested in. For instance, at the Fairfax County Commonwealth Attorney's Office, which is where we launched, elected Commonwealth Attorney Stephen Toscano was interested in bond reform. And we also had to ask, what kind of data do you have for us to analyze? And luckily they had some bond data. The work plan really has to be customized, Ben. It has to be realistic. And we did a work plan that was roughly 3 years, and it covered change management, like I said before, getting buy-in from the attorneys, community engagement, and then we helped build a dashboard. The dashboard is showcasing the work to the community.
So tell us about the dashboard.
The dashboard really is a tool, and we assisted in its development. And when I say we, I'm talking about myself, my project manager, my research team from American University, which is 2 research professors, 2 research associates.
Wow. Okay.
Yes, it's from American's Department of Justice Law and Criminology. To get that dashboard up, what we had to do was help the office collect the data, clean it, make sure it was accurate, assist with some of the analysis and quality control of it. And my vision, the reason why I even met Stephen Descano is I came to his office and I said, I think not only do you want a data program, but you want to use a Tableau software data dashboard, because Tableau is a great software. It's similar to Power BI. And the dashboard bin really is a way to measure, to see if the lawyers in the office are complying with the elected's policy.
Okay, I see how that works. So it really should mirror the policy of the person who is the elected.
Exactly.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. In Fairfax, the policy for the office as to bond, and just to give you the highlights, bond is a decision made by the judge to hold or release the defendant to the next court date. And in the country, there's been a huge issue about cash bond or bail, because it allows wealthy people to go home, but if you don't have $1,000 to post for bail or bond, then you stay in jail, even though until the next court date, even though your case hasn't been adjudicated. With Fairfax, they want to move away from this cash bail system, have a different analysis, and they just wanted to figure out if the defendant would be a danger to the community or a flight risk. And what the problem that was happening in Fairfax, and I think it also happened in other jurisdictions, is that there's no way to measure to see if the attorneys are in compliance with the policy. And the policy was, if it's a nonviolent misdemeanor offense or a nonviolent felony, and there's no danger of risk to the community, no flight risk, then the prosecutor in the courtroom is supposed to ask that defendant be released until the next court date. Released meaning going home,
right,
as opposed to being held in jail. But there was no data to ensure any of that was happening. And it wasn't happening. Well, prior to the data program, defendants were being improperly held when they should have been released, because the prosecutor should have asked for that. Now that the program is in place, we have seen amazing results. And the result is defendants are now being released. The lawyers are in compliance with the policy. They're getting trained on it if they're not.
Really? Wow, that's great. That's amazing.
And that addresses mass incarceration, because now people are going home to their community as opposed to staying in jail.
Okay, and that was specific to Fairfax?
Yes.
Okay. So how do you go and, like, I don't want to use the word infiltrate, but like get into like the DA's office and, you know, start working with them? What's the strategy to get into a new state office?
Well, it's really meeting with the elected. And I met Stephen Descano at a conference, and it was when he was newly elected with some other Virginia reform prosecutors. And we have a second office that we're working with, which is the Cobb County District Attorney's Office in Atlanta. I met that elected at the National Black Prosecutors Association conference roughly in 2022. And my approach is to meet with an elected and find out what their vision is. I want to understand what are the 2 or 3 things they want to accomplish in their term, and see if there's a alignment of our values, and then ask if they have a data analyst. Hopefully they do. Many times they don't.
Yeah. Yep.
And after several meetings, they become comfortable with my value add, as well as what I'm trying to do for them, and they can know that I'm going to customize our work plan to meet their exact need.
Wow. And so this impacts what the prosecutor's office ends up doing. Basically, like it's data-driven reform. is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And the big picture is we don't just want to look at one policy and then that's it. We use some data and then we let it go. We want to change the culture of the office so that the line prosecutors, when you just step in the office, your first thought is, I'm going to do a jury trial. But we also want that line prosecutor to think, I'm also going to fill out this form about my decision about a sentence that I gave to several defendants so that that can be collected and we can see if there's patterns and trends to make sure there's consistency and fairness with the sentence recommendations.
Sure. Okay, got it. Yeah, that's so. I mean, so how do you go about getting meetings with the representatives or the elected, and like who are you? I don't want to say targeting, but like where are you trying to do this right now?
Well, ideally, I would like to be in states where there's a higher incarceration rate.
Sure. Yep.
That's why I went to Georgia with the Cobb County DA's office, which is in Atlanta.
Uh-huh.
But in terms of how to connect, we're presenting our work. We're actually going to be presenting at the National Black Prosecutors Association.
That's awesome.
Yes.
That's huge. I think that's amazing. That's great.
And then Steve and I, when I say Steve, Commonwealth Attorney Stephen Descano.
Yep.
We're going to present at a convening of reform prosecutors on September 13th.
Okay.
This is hosted by Fair and Just Prosecution, which is a prosecutor reform nonprofit. And they convene reform prosecutors from around the country as a way to share best practices. And the focus of our presentation is going to be on data. And also we did a webinar. We, Commonwealth Attorney and I did a webinar with the Institute for Innovation Prosecution, which is another national nonprofit that's a thought leader in the focus was how to use data to address racial disparities. But to your point, the reason I connect with electeds is showcasing our work. And that's what we've been doing with these webinars and presentations. And then I also serve on the advisory board for the National District Attorneys Association. They have a research collaborative. Oh, wow. All these vehicles so that electeds know that you can make impact and you can do it with some fundamental things of just building a data program, hiring an external partner like my team, and having a vision of what needs to be done to deliver on your campaign promises. Wow.
So take me through like what a prosecutor would do, like what this kind of looks like. You know, you're there, the prosecutor's standing up there and they're like, hey, you know, like, isn't it true, blah, blah, blah. And so, and then they're to the point where they recommend something maybe to the judge or to the public defender. So like, how does that all work out after? And I don't mean to move away from the data thing, the stuff, but like what?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's a fair point because most people don't understand what a prosecutor does.
Yeah.
Actually, the prosecutor is the most powerful person in the courtroom. Yeah. Because they decide who to charge, who not to charge. And they can only dismiss a case. A judge cannot dismiss a case. That's why they're the most powerful actor in the criminal justice system. They're the gatekeeper to who gets into the courtroom because it's not the police who determines the charge, it's the prosecutor. And in terms of what happens on an average day, when I was at the Brooklyn DA's office, I would come to work and sometimes I would be assigned to a court part. Let's say in New York, they call them court parts. Okay. But if I was assigned to a court part, I would be handling maybe 50 cases in the morning where I would be taking plea agreements, or putting a plea offer on a case or offering a plea deal to a defendant, adjourning the case, getting discovery from defense counsel, turning over discovery. And then that same day I could go to trial, be bench trial in the afternoon.
Right,
so
okay.
It really would change each day. And the work is trial based. You're doing bench and jury trials and responding to, well, actually you're responding to evidentiary motions by the defense counsel. So there is writing.
So now, like, how does the program like who's aware of it? So it's the prosecutors and the judge, they're saying, okay, well, this is what this is what we're doing instead of like the jail time or instead of the bonds. So your hope is that um, it'll be like a different result.
Well, in terms of who knows about the data collection
Yeah.
piece, I'll give you Fairfax as an example. We made it well known in a press release.
Mhm.
And it was a press release that the Commonwealth Attorney's Office in Fairfax issued, and it said that we want to look at the criminal justice system as a whole, but we're going to look at it from what our role is as prosecutors. And the press release talked about the partners. My entity was a partner, as well as Measures for Justice and Vera Institute of Justice, and Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. And I suspect that judges may have been aware of that press release. The internal staff knew about these partnerships. The data program was public, and many prosecutor offices, they want their community to know that they're trying to be transparent and showcase what they do. It's their way to build trust. That they are being honest and trying to execute fair outcomes.
Okay. And is it like you're looking at a certain charge of a defendant, and then if it comes down to a certain charge or a certain result, you'll do one thing, and then if it's another thing, you'll do like X, like another thing? Or does that make any sense to you? I'm sorry.
Well, I think what you're talking about is it prosecutorial discretion, like how we make decisions about charging and plea offers and sentencing?
Well, just with the prosecution like reform, basically like trying to do something different than throw somebody in, jail. Does it depend on like what the outcome is of the crime? You know what I'm saying? Sort of.
It does. To your point, typically reform prosecutors, and I use that term loosely because this is really just prosecutors who want to support safety. If you're a prosecutor, you're going to look at the offense. Violent offenses such as shooting, armed robbery, home invasion, and where the defendant has a long history of doing that, repeat offenders. A prosecutor is going to want to handle those kinds of cases differently than a first-time offender who stole a bouquet of flowers from a flower store.
Sure.
And the latter is a situation where we're trying to put those kind of defendants in diversion, meaning diverting them out of the criminal justice system because maybe they're going to do 5 hours community service. And if they do that, then the case will be dismissed, the theft case of taking the bouquet of flowers. And the rationale for doing that is that if the case is dismissed, they don't have a misdemeanor conviction. And with a misdemeanor conviction, it really is devastating then because you can't get a job, you have jeopardy, you can't necessarily get a license if you want to do something that requires a permit or a license. So reform prosecution, progressive or conservative prosecution, to me, the labels aren't really as important as the thought is we definitely want to hold defendants accountable. We want to keep neighborhoods safe.
Sure.
We want more resources on the most violent crimes as opposed to over prosecuting on offenses that can be handled in a different way.
Okay. So maybe this helps. So this is from your website. It states, we work toward this goal with a dual approach. We assess diversion programs nationwide as alternatives to mass incarceration, and we utilize data analytics to identify unintentional disparities in decisions like charging, bail, plea offers, and sentencing recommendations. I think I was kind of focused in on the unintentional disparities and how those are treated. I think that's sort of like what I was trying. That's what I was trying to get at a little bit. Like how there's these unintentional disparities. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I'll give you a great example as to
Good.
historic disparities in sentencing for nonviolent drug possession cases. For
Mhm.
instance, historically, there's been harsher sentencing for African American men and other Latinx men and it's not just that it's you have to understand that in our country, most people use controlled substances at similar rates,
Mhm.
but certain communities, their arrest rate for instance, marijuana could be 5 times higher, which was the situation in Virginia with the African American community. Even though everyone in Virginia arguably uses marijuana at the same rate,
Mhm.
one population is always arrested for it and prosecuted for it. That's a disparity. But the hope is with decisions with charging, plea offers, bail, and sentencing, you want consistent, fair decisions. Like I'll give you an example. If I'm a prosecutor and I have 5 prosecutors that I supervise, and I'm a supervisor,
Mhm.
I want to make sure that the 5 prosecutors are consistent with their plea offers and
Mhm.
their charging. And it's important to say that I think prosecutors need to maintain their individual discretion. They have to analyze each case. But if you have 5 prosecutors and then one is way harsh than the other 4, and these are similar facts, similar defendants' history, that's an example of a disparity. And
Yeah.
that's
What about judges? Aren't judges that way too?
judges have a tremendous discretion because, like for the sentencing, it's the judge's decision. We make a recommendation as a prosecutor, but the
Right.
judge, yes, they have the
Right.
decision power, and there could be disparities with that too.
Sure. Yeah.
The challenge is, as prosecutors, they don't necessarily have data from the courts to see the uh, disparities with what the judge is deciding as to sentencing. Most prosecutor offices, they're just trying to collect their own data about their own lawyers' decision making. And it's been a struggle.
Yeah.
But to your point, it would be good to know that.
Right. Yeah. No, for sure. So what about those who are not on board with data-driven reform? Like, what are some of the points of contention that the opposition raises and that you have to deal with?
There's a deep fear with electeds, and the fear is not with all electeds, but some that if they release data that's unfavorable or that's even neutral, it'll be misconstrued and used against them to attack them.
Okay.
For instance, I think some electeds are concerned about being perceived as not really caring about safety. But the reality is, being a good prosecutor means you are committed to safety. And I think
Right.
even though hesitancy sometimes to release data, most people then understand that criminal justice can be bumpy sometimes. There could be the data could be not what you like in the beginning, but if you show growth that this is where we want to be, meaning we identified some disparities in plea offers, but this is what we're doing to remedy that. And this is the progress we've made since we identified this. I think the community will appreciate that, and then they start to trust you.
Okay. Fair. So that's a good point. So tell us about the data again that you're analyzing. Like, so what are your data analytics people doing like on a daily basis? Like when they go into one of these departments, or like what are they looking at? How does that work?
Sure. The research associates, they will be charged with making sure they're getting the data from the lawyers. I'll give you an
Okay.
example. Fairfax Commonwealth Attorney's Office in Virginia, we're with that bond data. The research associates were making sure that the decision that the prosecutor made was captured on paper, electronically,
Wow.
and then you have to multiply that by all the cases the prosecutors handle and making sure that it's accurate and that there's quality control, and then working with the internal data director to help create a dashboard.
Okay.
Helping draft protocols for data collection, because the office is really doing just a wonderful job. So
Wow.
the big picture of what we do is we bring our data team to an office, and we do this by really whatever data set the office wants to look at. For instance, if they want to look at 4,000 cases going back a year, if they want to look at charging decisions, plea offer, bail, sentencing decisions going back in time, or if they want to just go forward in time, we can do that and start collecting data forward.
Okay.
And we have 2 research professors who manage the associates, and they work with the internal data team at a prosecutor's office. The overall goal is we are acting as the external partner to do what really a full-time person internally needs to do. But we're just there just to help that office start. And then over time, a prosecutor office will likely hire a policy analyst or a research director or data director to take on what we've started for them. Our role is just to help them start.
Gotcha.
And then if they get funding, they're going to hire somebody who can be a data analyst at the very minimum.
Okay. And so you mentioned like some of these places might just want to go forward with the data, right? Like, so does that like make your job easier in a way? Like, because you don't have to like put together all the stuff that they're like, hey, please go 25 years back. You know, like you want them to kind of go, if they go forward, it's a little easier, right?
It is, because then you can create the standards of quality in terms of what you're collecting, all the details and how it's collected. But to be fair, most prosecutors' offices don't have data going back 25 years. I think the scenario is likely they have a year back.
Yeah.
Well, more common is we have to go forward. We have to start from the beginning and collect going forward.
Do you think this, and I know it's not about this, I'm curious, I'm asking this question, like, is it about, will the district or the state save money, or like, is that like sort of something that happens from this?
I'm glad you mentioned that. The answer is yes. The cost to incarcerate someone
Right.
is exceptionally expensive, as opposed to a diversion program, which is much cheaper. Like, for instance, just a hypothetical scenario would be if it costs $70,000 to incarcerate one defendant, or to have them go through the criminal justice process from arrest to sentencing. I'm just using a number to get to the, and it costs $200 for them to be admitted into a diversion program where they're getting counseling, community service, mental health evaluations, job referral, education referrals, and that costs $200, then it really is viable. And when they do the program, the recidivism rate is low.
Right.
And nationally, it's known that diversion programs have a low reoffense or recidivism rate.
So like, where does like like what I think about is like non-violent crimes, like no victims, marijuana, which is like legal places now. So now it's sort of like, I mean, do they look at those things and want to categorize those and the punishments like a certain way?
Well, if I'm understanding your question, the different offenses, are you asking how they're treated differently?
Yeah, I mean, like, is that something that they're sort of making sure like like a victimless crime is categorized one way, so it's not they're not putting somebody like behind bars, and it's like sort of reformed a little bit the way that they treat the outcome of a case like that.
Definitely. I think there's sensitivity to making sure that you're considering what the victim wants, like in an assault case. or a robbery, a burglary, anytime where there's a victim, I think you always, as a prosecutor, you're supposed to be an advocate for the people, the government, but as well as the defendant. And I think in terms of reform, being a strong advocate for what they bring to a case is important. That doesn't change with data. And I think having a data program that actually can encompass victims, like for instance, if you had statistics on making sure the victims are getting services that they needed, for instance, some prosecutor offices have created family justice advocacy centers where victims can come and get services and assistance. That needs a data program because they're prosecutor led. I think all of what we've been talking about tonight, what we're really doing, the big picture idea is just to put metrics into a prosecutor's office.
Right. Okay. So just speaking of the approach, like, you have like prosecutors who then become criminal defense attorneys, right? And then you have prosecutors who find like a path with prosecution reform, like yourself. Like, how do we reconcile those two? I mean, is there any reconciliation? Like, you hear criminal defense attorneys say, "Oh, I worked as a prosecutor, so I learned all the tricks of the trade, and I can do this now." And then, as a criminal defense attorney, and this person shouldn't be charged like this much; they should only have this. So, is it sort of like I know it's obviously different, but how do we like reconcile those two things, or can you not?
I think they are reconciled because you can be a prosecutor and be a former defense attorney, criminal defense attorney. I've seen that. And you can be a reformed prosecutor and never been a defense attorney. What I have noticed is that in the past 5 years, more criminal defense attorneys are running to be the elected.
Okay. Okay.
Because I think part of the prosecutor reform movement is not necessarily just having someone who's been a career prosecutor become an elected. It's sometimes having someone who was a criminal defense attorney or who worked for CLU as an attorney run for election. I think those paths are combined. I think it's evolved, which is a good thing.
Sure. So tell us more about the data, like the AI. It's artificial intelligence is, it's changing so much the legal profession. I mean, I don't really think it's going to like take over the legal profession or anything, but how do you see AI impacting your work in this data-driven reform?
Artificial intelligence is already part of the criminal justice system because police use it, judges use it. The issue is whether prosecutors are interested in using artificial intelligence. They should. It's part of a data program because it can be used as a tool to assist prosecutors. Now, let me be clear, but I don't think AI should take over the judgment an attorney has or take over kind of prosecutorial discretion. You really have to evaluate each case, the facts of the case, the defense attorney assign, the judge assign, whether you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. But there's an article by the Florida International University that it came out, I think, this year, and they've done some wonderful work with prosecutor reform. And they suggested offices being open to using AI. And it can be used to help the administration kind of, when I say administration tasks, like going through large swaths of information, camera footage, discovery, and it's still can be used as a tool as to analyze decisions like charging, bail, plea offer, sentencing. But I do believe you have to be careful because sometimes AI can be biased. There is an article that came out recently, Time Magazine. It talked about how police were using a photo technology to identify suspects. It has led to the wrong people being arrested.
Ooh.
And it's happened more often in the African-American community. I think that AI is a tool. I don't think it replaces a police officer or prosecutor's judgment, but it can be a part of a larger data program. When I say data program, I mean an external partner like my entity, an internal team at a prosecutor's office, and then a data dashboard. And part of that could be AI as well.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely, large swaths of documents. Is that what you said? It's definitely, breaking those down. Are you going to be using any of that or any AI maybe eventually to go through some of the data to get these districts started on what they're trying to do?
I am open to using AI. I haven't used it in my work, but I think it is going to be the future because judges are using it and police departments use it. I think I see that it will be the future gradually. I think with prosecutors, Ben, they're just trying to first build a data program.
Yeah.
And by the time they get to AI, that's going to take some years. But it is part of our culture now.
Right.
It's just being careful about using it, having some sensitivity, making sure it's not biased, and not relying on it to take over roles.
Yeah, for sure. So I believe you were in Idaho at the National District. What's that? Was it Iowa?
I was, yeah.
Idaho. Boise. At the National District Attorneys Association 2024 Summer Summit. Was that it?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
this year's event focused on how district attorneys can center victims and their experiences and amplify their voices. Was there anything that you wanted to say about that? It looked like it was a pretty good event. A lot of things going on there.
It really was. And it reminded me that as prosecutors, we have to do better with victims. We can't just think of them as witnesses that we put on the stand. We ask them questions on direct examination, extrapolate what we want so that because in our minds, we're thinking of the elements we have to prove beyond each element beyond reasonable doubt.
Right.
We have to look at this as this is someone who's been hurt. And this is somebody that needs a lot more care. And that's where I learned at the conference about how prosecutors really need to think about creating family advocacy centers where victims can come and get some of the services they need. In long term, I think that will really help not only the victim, the victim's family, but it helps our profession.
Sure.
Because you can't just be throwing witnesses on the stand. These are humans with families who've gone through.
Yeah, for sure. So what advice would you have for someone wanting to go from practitioner to advocate?
I'm so glad you asked that question. If anyone is listening and you have a dream, I think it's so important to follow that dream because I had this big picture vision. I was excited about it. And it was in 2020 that the vision was, I want to make impact. So my advice is, if there's setbacks, don't let that stop you. And for me, I had a team that was working for me for free, essentially, trying to put together my data program.
Wow.
I had a team from American University, family, friends, my project manager, giving me time to develop this new way. And the new way was data dashboards at prosecutor offices and specifically Tableau dashboards. So my advice is to dream big and have the courage to do something that's different than the traditional road of being a lawyer, being at a law firm, or being at a government agency. And the other thing I will say this, Ben, when I launched my consulting firm, we were fortunate, but also what was happening in my personal life is that my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. We were very close, and my family were very close, and that was devastating. But the reason why I wanted to share this is because my family was behind me. They really wanted me to pursue this work because they knew that I was going to help our community. And for me, this is a calling. So I had to balance taking care of my family while launching a new body of work at a new prosecutor office. And what I want to share is that it took a lot of courage for me to do it, but I now see that you need people to take risks and have courage. And I hope that the people that are listening to this will be inspired to take a risk and do what feeds your soul. Just do it.
I love that. Thank you so much for that. And is there anything we left out that you wanted to talk about for, no, we're good? That was great advice. Thank you for sharing all that with us. Allison Pierre, so stay right there. Everybody else, thanks for tuning in today. And wherever you are in the world today, enjoy yourselves.